Rolling, rolling, rolling. Keep those cameras rolling, right? When we're born with the ability to do two basic things that are key to our ability to survive in this new environment we've been brought into, thrust into. We have these completely empty brains. So one of the things we can do is we can gather information, we gather knowledge. We're doing intel on this world around us to figure it all out. And it's curiosity that drives that search for knowledge, that hunger for knowledge. The other thing we're good at is we're able to make connections between disparate pieces of that knowledge. All this random stuff floating around in our head, we're able to make connections with those pieces of knowledge to come up with new ideas that help us with our survival. So somebody figured out to bring fire into the cave from the burning tree that got struck by lightning. People figured out that they can make pots out of this stuff called clay. It was just something all humans can do. Another thing that we're born with is this fear mechanism called the fight or flight mechanism. It was really healthy back in the old days to have this fight or flight to run away from dinosaurs, but it's not really helpful to us today. As you start coming up with these new ideas and you start sharing them and becoming more incorporated into your society as a young human, you basically start putting yourself in positions to be criticized and judged for the ideas you have. The first time you're judged, you get stung by that. You're like, oh my God, I just got judged. Before you did everything because it was just the pure joy of learning and exploration. You were a fearless explorer. But with this new thing called criticism from other people, you start to question things about yourself and you start to modify your behavior and you start to conform more and more to what the rules are of society so that you don't feel that stinging, that pain. And what you do is you run away because our brains are normally wired to be safe. We want to be safe. And so we are going to automatically go in that direction. That's that fight or flight thing. When you conform, it forces you to bury your uniqueness, the pure you were when you were born, when you were that young, fearless toddler, and heap more and more labels on top about what you will and won't do, what you can and can't do, and what you definitely should and shouldn't do. So we become this sort of amalgam of everybody else's expectations, and we lose our sense of self. It's in there. It's just buried under an avalanche of Post-it notes that say all those things about can and can't and should and shouldn't. In order to get creative, you have to reconnect with that young toddler you used to be that was having all these wonderful ideas, free of criticism, free of judgment, fearlessly, because it takes courage to be creative. I'm going to introduce you to 5 things that you can do to start getting your creative on, to start digging out that dormant, buried creativity. The first thing I want to tell you to do is reconnect with that lost curiosity. That's supposed to be a magnifying glass. Looking for new knowledge, like a detective. Okay, so the more you start refreshing and building more new random pieces of knowledge in your head, the more you're feeding the brain what it loves, which is information. It's like chocolate ice cream to the brain. So the more you feed that, the more you're going to know, and the more you're going to be able to make new connections in your brain between even more random knowledge, and you're going to be able to come up with better ideas than everybody else, because they're all still stuck in conformity land and lack of curiosity land. People they're wired to be safe, so they're going to stay in their comfort zone. They're going to just hang out with the people they know, doing what they always do, and not go and become these fearless explorers of other cultures, of eating other kinds of foods, whatever it might be. So get that back on. So number 2 is push your comfort zone. That's supposed to be a scared guy shivering behind a wall hiding because he's afraid to come out of his comfort zone. So don't do that. You're going to not do that. You're going to not be hiding behind your comfort zone. You're going to get out and do new things. But how do you get out of your comfort zone when you're so busy being terrified, too terrified to even really get your curiosity on? How do you get past that? Well, fear is what comfort zones are all about. You've heard kind of the phrases like everything you've ever wanted is on the other side of fear, and be afraid but do it anyway. These are easy things to say, but they're not easy things to do. And so somehow you have to get up the courage to walk through that fog of fear and get to the other side. Students have asked me how I've been successful, because I have been very successful in my life as far as I'm concerned. We all have our own definition of success. And students ask me, how have I gotten there? Because I'm consumed with fear. I'm wildly insecure. I've had rough times that have really made me put up a lot of shields. Here was my secret. And you'd have to figure out what your secret is, whatever you can do to combat that fear. My way to combat my fear was that my desire to do something, my desire to achieve something or to have something was always greater than my fear of doing it. So sure, there are things I'm still too afraid to do. Definitely still things I'm too afraid to do, but I must not want them that bad. And so I'm not going to beat myself up over that. Number 3 is to challenge your assumptions. And I mean the assumptions you make about you. And what I mean by challenge assumptions is to look yourself in the eye and challenge the things you think about yourself. Things that are destructive. They're called limiting beliefs. You can look up limiting beliefs. Limiting beliefs are things you think about yourself that could be subliminal. They could be things you say out loud about yourself. But they can also be overcome if you challenge them. But if you don't challenge them, what they're doing is they're putting a ceiling on your potential. So what's an example of a limiting belief? Well, one would be like, well, I'm not smart enough to blank. Whatever your belief is about you, you're thinking that and you are not framing it the way you should. When you're thinking something that is harmful to you, you need to frame it in a more positive way. So if I'm talking about handsome, or let's just say smart enough, I'm not smart enough to be in that committee, but wait a minute, what do I already know that would actually be something that would be a great contribution to this effort? When you think the thought, be aware of it. Try to hear yourself say it. Listen to the butterflies in your stomach. Whatever your clues are that you're actually thinking a negative thought, a limiting belief, and then challenge it. Now go, wait a minute, what did I just think about myself? Let me reframe that in a positive way, because you're amazing and you're not whatever those things you're thinking, you're not that person. Embrace your gifts. Okay, number 4, learn brainstorming techniques. That's supposed to be a brain. That's a brain. And this is lightning. Brainstorming, like a brain and a storm. You see, I mash 2 things together. That's one of the techniques. Mashing 2 ideas together. So your brain does that naturally, it connects ideas, but you can force your brain to mash 2 ideas together by tricking it using something called word association, by taking 2 different words and mashing them together. Like if you have a commuter railroad that is not doing well, it was one example I read, how can we jazz it up for consumers? Well, think of a word like school. What can you think about with a school? Well, like recess. So you might say, how can we mash the word recess into the word commuter railroad, and maybe you'd come up with the ideas, hey, I know we could create a gaming car where you had people in the gaming car could play each other with all these various games that were in there. With those kinds of techniques like word association or forced association, provocative thinking is another one, brain writing is another one. What these techniques do is they trick your brain into getting beyond the guardhouse of your judgmental, predictable, analytical brain that thinks too much and gets around to the good stuff in the back that's hiding back there in the dark. Those are really effective at jumpstarting your brain to do what it does naturally, which is making connections between these disparate pieces of information. Don't go with your first idea. Use this term called divergent thinking. Look that up. It means coming up with lots of ideas, because the concept that the more ideas you have, the more chance that one of them is going to actually work. It's going to be effective. So come up with lots of ideas. Don't ever go with your first or second idea, because it's the same idea everyone on the planet's going to have, because we are all conformists and we all think the same in a big way. And you're going to be thinking better and differently if you do all these other things that we've talked about. Okay, so last but not least, number 5, forgive yourself. You probably wonder, what do I have to forgive myself for? Well, for thinking that you're not beautiful and wonderfully, wonderfully imperfect. We're all wonderfully beautiful and imperfect. A lot has happened to us before now that have really had a big impact on who we are and what we think about ourselves. And a lot of it is negative, a lot of it is positive, but a lot of it is negative. We get a lot of messages that we're not okay. We have schools telling us that we're not okay. They want you to focus on STEM regardless of what your skills are, what your interests are. We all have to be tested at it and do well, even if we really stink at it. And it makes us feel stupid when we fail science and math tests, when we're not predisposed to do that. And other people around you think you're stupid because you're failing science and math. What are you, stupid? So we get these messages from our schools. We get messages from our parents who do things because they love us, but they say things like, why can't you be like everybody else? Why do you have to be different? Because I am different, Mom and Dad. I'm a unique human being, and I have wildly different interests than you do, and I don't want to be a nurse, I want to be a filmmaker. Or I don't want to be a filmmaker, I want to be a nurse. Your peers, they can be, your school's doing it, you have your parents doing it, you have your peers doing it, saying, peers can be very judgmental and very critical of you, of whether or not you're fitting in and you're wearing the right clothes, or you're talking to the right people, or whatever it is, and they can really box you into this tight little, web of conformity, which is really crippling. And you get told that the weird things you like are really not okay. Like, you're reading that book, are you serious? Like, who reads that? That's like trash. Remember, we're all different. We have different personalities. All of you have wildly different personalities. You have different intelligences, which means there are different things that you're pretty much predisposed to do better than others because you're just more interested in them, and maybe your brain is wired that way. Maybe you're more musical, maybe you're more into math and science, maybe you're more into sports, kinesthetic and dance. We all have very different interests that lead to great skills, unless you're bent to do things that you're not meant to be. And the third one is the experiences that you've had in your life that have brought you to this point in your life. All of us have suffered wildly different experiences to get where we are today. We've suffered immeasurable pain. We've had incredible successes. All of these things are just ours to own. Nobody else has them. And so to lump us all together onto one conveyor belt of conformity and mediocrity is just killer to our self-esteem, to our feeling that we're okay. And our goal is for all of us to work towards self-actualization. Self-actualization is a term that means to be the best you can be, the best you can be. You want to work toward that and basically start divorcing all of these thoughts that have been put into you that you have about yourself, and pulling them out of you and peeling them off and throwing them in the garbage, because it's only through doing these things and framing everything about yourself more positively that is going to make you a healthier, stronger you. You have to figure out who you really are. Get back to that fearless toddler. There's too much muddle of other people's expectations inside of you to really know who's doing the creative thinking here. Your ideas are the amalgam of everybody else's expectations. And so you got to get to the purity of that fearless toddler you used to be that got so stifled throughout your life. And go get your toddler back on. One last time, here are the 5 things. 1, get your curiosity on. Number 2, push your comfort zone. Number 3, challenge assumptions. Number 4, learn brainstorming techniques. And lastly, and probably most importantly, 5, forgive yourself. Take care.